Right, welcome back. Joseph, take it away.
Hey, everybody, and thanks for joining the Red Team Village and Hacking is Not a Crime HackerCon. And with us today, or right now, the next speaker is Joseph Menn. It's my honor and privilege to be able to introduce another Joseph, and specifically Joseph Menn. He's been an amazing contributor to the industry. Joseph is an investigative reporter for Reuters. He is the longest serving and most respected mainstream journalist on cybersecurity. He has won 3 Best in Business awards from the Society of American Business Editors and Writers, and has been a finalist for 3 Gerald Loeb Awards. Among some of the books that he has written, and you probably are aware of, are Fatal System Error and Cult of the Dead Cow, which we're showing right now. So without further ado, gives me great privilege to introduce Joseph Menn.
Thanks very much, Joseph. I appreciate it. I really appreciate the chance to be here. I'd like to thank the organizers. I find cons like this to be super inspiring and really vital for the community and for growth. And I appreciate everybody who is spending some of this, where I am, beautiful spring day after a year already cooped up inside again for this. So thank you. I want to talk about well, I'd say I'm here because I've covered this stuff for 20 years, but probably most importantly because of the Cult of the Dead Cow book, which came out almost 2 years ago now, before the collapse of civilization. And that had a lot of mainstream attention, I think largely because with their blessing, I outed all of the core members of CDC, and that happened to include a guy from Texas named Beto O'Rourke, who had just declared for president of the United States. So suddenly we had not only the first credible presidential candidate who'd been a hacker, but somebody who happens to have been an early member of the most influential hacking group in US history. And for that matter, gender integrated it. So that got a lot of mainstream attention. I wanted mainstream attention for the book because I think that technology is playing an increasingly vital and more often dark role in our everyday lives and our societies than ever before. And privacy and security, as you know, is at the heart of the most important decisions about how technology is used. I also wanted to reach newer entrants to InfoSec, people starting out in hacking, so they don't have to go back and read 3 decades of Usenix posts to figure out what the major advances and compromises and mistakes and triumphs have been in the hacking community. I wanted to try and deliver it in a palatable form so people wouldn't mind learning history and they'd be interested in some of the characters. I think that more than ever, hackers are vital to society's development, not only because of the centrality of tech, but because I think the foremost quality of a serious hacker is critical thinking. And we are at some kind of all-time shortage in critical thinking. We have people who believe that the earth is flat. We have people that believe that there are microchips and vaccines that are actually going to save their lives. And hackers, by definition, are critical thinkers because they don't just work within the confines that have been given to them by some system. They try and see what else they can get the system to do. They can see how they can break the system and how to make it better. And I that needs to be celebrated. And I also, as I said, I wanted to reach new entrants into hacking and security because, it's gotten professionalized now, and that's probably inevitable and probably largely good. But you lose things when it turns into a sort of a mainstream profession. The old school hackers sort of had to develop their own moral code. And that's for a few reasons. One of them is that in the olden days, when there were modems and you needed to long distance connections in order to download files or connect to a bulletin board, most of them were teenagers and couldn't afford the multi-$100 phone bills that their parents were going to get stuck with. And so they pretty much, to a person, wound up using somebody else's credit card or phone calling card or taking advantage of somebody else's phone line. And it's not great that everybody was a criminal, but it did force them to think about moral consequences and moral decisions. Is it better to steal a little bit from a lot of people? Is it better to steal a lot from a big, uncaring corporation? Everybody had to think about this. And you might not be comfortable with where most of them wound up, but they actually put in the work. And I think that turns out to be really important in hacking and security work. Because if you go to like a nice college and work in a nice big company doing nice cybery things, you can wind up sleepwalking into doing things that don't do people any good and that actually harm people. And I think the old school folks and people who paid attention to them or pay attention to them now can save themselves and others a lot of grief by thinking about what the morally right thing to do is for them. Cult of the Dead Cow, I picked them as the core narrative of my book because they go all the way back to those olden days in the mid 80s. Sort of this mini golden era after the movie War Games came out and taught people what they could do with a modem, and before the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act 3 years later took it all away, or at least made it illegal to do what they'd been doing. So that sort of set them up in natural opposition to government, or at least made them think critically about the role of law and government and what they were doing. One way or another, the CDC has hit all the major inflection points of info security in the decades since then, and they led the way in a lot of them. If you've heard of them, or if you'd heard of them before my book, it sort of depends when you came of age, how you heard of them. If you're the same age as they are, you might know them in their sort of initial incarnation of these sort of funny, irreverent, frequently profane text files, which is, the Beto O'Rourke era of the group. They did that, and they were sort of like the liberal arts wing of the hacker underground for a while. There were more technically proficient groups like Legion of Doom, Masters of Destruction, who often wound up in jail. CDC avoided that by sort of, by doing more of the writing and more of the community building and less of the criminal plotting, at least in the open. But because they sort of had this sort of cultural presence, they attracted people who were technically proficient, including members of the Loft, the famed Boston hackerspace group that wound up testifying before Congress in 1998 that any one of them could take down the internet in half an hour. The Loft also pioneered responsible disclosure, which remains a vibrant topic. So if you discovered the CDC a little later, in the late 90s, it was probably because they had introduced back orifice and then BO2K, which were Trojans for taking control of a Windows box with remarkable ease. I think it's important to note that was not a unanimous back orifice. The release of back orifice was not an easy call for the Cult of the Dead Cow. There was internal debate about whether it was the right thing to do or not. A lot of people they knew would get hacked because they were throwing out these CDs to the crowd at DEF CON. But their feeling was that Microsoft was a court-certified monopoly at that point. They had suddenly made security a vital interest to tens of millions of people, as opposed to just the enterprise security buyers that Loft was busy advising people about. And there was no security in there. And there was no way to get them to put security in Windows 95 and subsequent editions without serious public attention. So what the CDC decided to do was to have a media circus. And they did that. They, with call and response wrapping from the stage at DEF CON, lots and lots of media interviews. They put a lot of pressure on Microsoft and, helped unstick the great cargo ship from Redmond. There are a lot of things that CDC did after that, or its members, that were very important. I mean, in effect, they sort of created the modern InfoSec industry. They founded AtStake, which is one of the earliest boutique hacking as a service companies that went inside big banks, Microsoft and others, and told them what they were doing wrong. Two of the members created Veracode, which is now $1 billion company, but was very early in binary analysis. So customers who couldn't see the source code or could only see third-party audits of source code could actually look at what the binaries were doing inside their machines, which was super important. And Mudge went on to DARPA, where he ran grant making for cybersecurity on offense and defense, and created a fast track so that an individual hacker or a couple of hackers who wanted to work with the government could do so. For our purposes today, the most important thing is that they came up with the term hacktivism, and they worked very hard to get it into the English language. They had a number of definitions over the years, but the one that resonates, I think, the most today was hacking and security work in service of human rights. And that's a really good grounding and frame. Again, as there was a range of people politically inside CDC, as well as, a range of views about how often the law should be followed. But I think it's interesting that how the first target of hacktivism, and that was Chinese government censorship through the Great Firewall and later surveillance, and that really united the CDC because there were people within the CDC who were hippies who hate the U.S. government, and there were people in the CDC that were working for U.S. government intelligence, but nobody liked what the Chinese government was doing to internet users. And so it was kind of a natural initial target for a broader political movement and trying to bring politics towards, the technology industry as a whole. So one of the things they did was they worked on a privacy protecting browser, and that prodded Tor to adopt something similar, which is now how most people use Tor. Oxblood Ruffin, who is sort of the leading proponent of hacktivism within CDC, also had early talks with a guy at the University of Toronto named Ron Diebert, as Ron was forming Citizen Lab. And Citizen Lab has gone on to be the top watchdog that tracks how governments are misusing technology against their own populations. So they had a very serious impact there. Later, Oxblood's work with Tibetans, protecting them from Chinese malware, would help the Citizen Lab produce the first comprehensive account of an APT, in this case, broad Chinese surveillance of embassies, universities, and dissidents around the world. The next great wave, I guess, of hacktivism was 10 years later, and that was Anonymous. Like the CDC, Anonymous started out as sort of teenage prankster types, and then they had their own sort of development on the fly. For them, it was sort of an easy transition from 4chan and crap posting to what really got them mad was Scientology, which had gotten the CDC mad as well. And Scientology was devoted to censoring sacred texts, and like the CDC, Anonymous doesn't like censorship, and so they did a number of things against the Scientology, a number of real-world protests, and then I wrote a story in the Financial Times when I was working there that said that a security researcher was going to give a talk at B-Sides, San Francisco, and reveal the people that he said were leaders of Anonymous. And this prompted some of the more proficient hackers within Anonymous to hack the hell out of that guy, out of that guy's company, dump all his files and his emails, and put his social security number on Twitter, which wasn't very nice. And then they went on this amazing spree as LulzSec, where they took requests, and it was like performance art hacking. I remember in particular them getting inside one of Rupert Murdoch's publications websites and posting a false obit of Murdoch himself. This ended with some FBI and UK equivalent investigations, in particular the arrest of one of the core members, and who they then turned against the others. And then things went quiet for a few years. And then there was this third wave, I would say, where two, in particular, Hacking Team and Gamma Group, which both provided surveillance tech, were hacked by an entity calling itself Phineas Fisher, after Fin Fisher spyware that was sold by Gamma Group, supposedly only to, fine upstanding governments, but in fact, to lots of people who are not very nice. Phineas Fisher held themselves out as a public-spirited anarchist, and it dumped files online, and a pretty instructive how-to guide explaining what their process was in getting into both of these companies. What software was they found that was an error, and sort of calling on others to do this themselves. Unlike the leaders of LulzSec, Phineas Fisher has never been identified or arrested, to our knowledge, and it's unclear who or what Phineas Fisher actually is. I go through some of this in my book. It is possible that Phineas Fisher is the lone hacker with amazing skills that they make themselves out to be. It is also possible that Phineas Fisher is a Russian operation. And one of the reasons I say that, Russian intelligence, one of the reasons I say that is that at the same time that Phineas was dumping Hacking Team and Gamma Group tools, which were used primarily by Western authorities, known Russian intelligence was dumping tools from the NSA and CIA, burning them in the middle of this sort of big Cold War going on in cyber espionage. So we don't know. You can have whatever opinion you want. It's worth reading up on, but it points to the murkiness in hacktivism going forward, where there's always going to be the possibility of nation states in hacktivism clothing. Since then, there have been Russian groups that have purported to be hacktivists dumping Ukrainian government files. That's actually Russian intelligence. And in the meantime, more recently, in the last couple of years, there was a hack of a Russian intelligence contractor in Moscow, and those files are dumped by some hacktivist group that had never been heard of before, that I would be surprised if they are unaffiliated with Western intelligence. So it's going to be murky, and that's just part of the way it's going to be going forward. All of which brings us to now, and the biggest run of hacktivism in at least 10 years since the heyday of LulzSec, maybe since the CDC 20 years ago. And in part of it, it's interesting that it builds on sort of certain qualities, lessons from each of the past movements. So in the case of Anonymous itself, there's a gentleman named Aubrey Cottle, who was an early member of Anonymous and an active participant in kind of the online raiding culture, which wasn't particularly political. It had some political parts, but it wasn't the big political stuff that we saw come later, where it was against oppressive regimes and that sort of thing. So Aubrey got mad about QAnon, in particular, not only just spreading lies, but usurping some of the terminology, the methods, and the style of the original Anonymous. So Aubrey didn't like that. And he did support the Black Lives Matter protests of a year ago. So he and other old school nons came back on Twitter, made themselves a much more visible presence, and helped coordinate things like flooding of a Dallas police app that was asking for snitching on protesters. Those apps wound up getting flooded with things like K-pop fan cams, and it was just highly entertaining. More recently, there has been this incredible run. There is an anonymous ally who uses the name Donk Enby. Donk scraped videos from Parler that were shot by the people inside the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. Some of those protesters thought they had deleted those videos, and they hadn't actually been deleted. And because of Donk Enby and Donk's supporters, all of that got archived, handed off to nonprofit media like ProPublica and to Congress, which used it to impeach Donald Trump for a second time. It actually became an incredibly valuable resource. Somebody else, people unknown, hacked Gab repeatedly, another right-wing network, and archived and preserved private messages and group messages, which are being shared selectively with researchers and the media via distributed denial of secrets, which is kind of a WikiLeaks done better. I forgot to mention earlier that one of the ways that Anonymous pivoted to a more political stance was when WikiLeaks was being less evil. PayPal and some of the other credit card processors stopped taking donations to WikiLeaks, and that struck Anonymous as censorship, et cetera. So they launched denial of service attacks on PayPal and others. So that was, again, sort of censorship, core internet values, freedom of information, helped provoke people who were more interested in hacking and pranking to a greater political stance. Most recently, a hacker in Switzerland, 21-year-old named Tilly Kottmann, hacked or took credit for breaking into a Silicon Valley surveillance tech company called Verkada. Tilly posted videos from inside Verkada, which included jails, medical facilities, big corporations, stuff that not everybody at Verkada should have been looking at, let alone the open internet, and this was exposed. That was pretty dramatic. A lot of companies either cut ties with Verkada or said they would look again. In the meantime, U.S. legal proceedings that were already underway sped up in a big way. Tilly got raided in Switzerland and indicted just a week ago now for previous liberating of proprietary code, allegedly from various big corporations. There wasn't much of a profit motive. In fact, all the U.S. prosecutors could point to were some T-shirts that said things like "Cat Girl Hacker" and "Venture Anti-Capitalist." I believe those are still for sale online. I wrote about this just a couple days ago for Reuters, so you could read up on that. Tilly and allies believe that the indictment was largely about intimidating other hacktivists. And, it certainly made people close to Tilly nervous. Tilly did not have the greatest OPSEC in the world. And, it is quite possible that, in fact, what this indictment will do is teach more people younger people to be more careful about how they do things, should they decide to do things that would not meet with favor by U.S. authorities. I don't actually believe that this is going to stop hacktivism's resurgence. There have been too many huge successes in too short a time. Gab has had to go offline repeatedly. A lot of users of Parler lost faith in the security of the system, understandably. And even Myanmar and officials in Myanmar have been discomfited by Donkenby's leak, again through distributed denial of secrets, of military contracts with Western businesses. Among other things, Google yanked its services from some of the generals supporting the junta. This has been like a mini golden age already for hacktivism, and even if there are subsequent arrests, one of the things that Topiary, then the public face of Lulzsec, said near the end of their run, you can't arrest an idea, and I think hacktivism is a very powerful idea. I also wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the professionalism of the InfoSec industry. One thing that wasn't around 10 years ago, and certainly wasn't around 20 years ago, were so many different ways for hackers to go straight. The bug bounty platforms and many individual companies offering vulnerability disclosure programs and bug bounties directly are a wonderful resource and a good way to earn money while doing good. But they also buy silence. The bug bounty, the major bug bounty platforms, they have arbitration ways of arbitrating this, but they really do tend to favor the companies that are paying for their services. Even the members of the loft that invented responsible disclosure were well aware of their leverage, and they were about helping the customers of the big companies and the general public more than the big companies. In a way, the cult of the dead cow was part of that leverage. If the loft guys couldn't get a serious response from the likes of Microsoft, then meet my, hairy, uncouth cousin from Texas, the CDC, and they're going to embarrass the hell out of you in the national media. So I think they would look askance at some of these programs now. I think it's interesting that Aubrey Caudill, in addition, the returnee from Anonymous, in addition to continuing to be an activist and use the media and use Twitter and other platforms to agitate for better security policies or what he considers to be more ethical policies, works with my fellow speaker today, John Jackson, and others in following bug bounty platforms. So he's doing both. And I think that's really interesting. It is a legitimate means, but it should not be considered the only means by any stretch to try to affect change. And that's why it's important to try and chart out for yourself what you think is the most ethical thing to do to help the most people. That's all I had to say. I'm going to check the Discord now and see if there are any questions I could briefly answer, and then I will stick around and answer more online while during the next couple of talks. Certainly appreciate everybody who has who's been watching. Oh, thanks for posting the book cover. Let's see. Any questions on the Discord here?
We don't have any questions in Discord, and also I'm monitoring a few YouTube channels and Twitch channels as well. A lot of kudos, and as a matter of fact, a lot of people actually commenting that the cult of the death cow is still alive.
That's true.
But not a specific question for the. Okay, so Ray Redacted, actually, I just asked a question, and there's a little bit of delay, right? About 40 seconds delay whenever we actually talk, and they can actually ask the questions. But the question is, so what is next from now on?
Well, I mean, I think, even within the CDC, there are lots of differences of opinion about what was good, what was appropriate for hacktivism. They are certainly paying attention to what's happening now. And, for large part are pretty excited about it. I think the overtly political hacktivism against Gab and Parler is super interesting. I will say that I think one thing that has also, CDC was very good at using and sometimes abusing the media. I think that's a key component that that Anonymous picked up on. I think we're going to see more of that going forward. And there's some argument these days. Some people think that Facebook and Google and the other big tech powers are so obnoxious that good security, ethical security work can't be done within it. If you happen to believe that, I don't think that's true, because people have been able to do things within it by working back channel with media, with activists, with groups like Amnesty International, with members of Congress. I think that even individuals can make great contributions to, using technology as a moral force for human rights wherever they are, on their own, inside smart startups, nonprofits, big companies, government. There are many more ways to get the job done now than there were in the times of CDC, and CDC and others have paved the way to make that more doable. And I think people will be taking advantage of all those different channels, legal and extra.
And there's another question that came in from Johnny C. That you always say that that there are a little bit of differences of opinion inside of the CDC. Will that go for political positions as well, or how far does that go?
So I think the majority were left leaning, but not everybody was, and within left, there's a pretty big range from mildly liberal to march in the streets every day. So I think that was the range realistically. Like I said, there are people that were working for defense contractors. I think one of the things that's interesting is when the CDC, most of them started to go straight. It was rough for the people before them, people who were in Legion of Doom, who started their own security companies. They tended to work with the FBI, and that got them shunned. And so the compromise that Mudge and some others in CDC took was that they would work with U.S. intelligence, but not law enforcement. They would talk about capabilities and methods, but not individuals. They wouldn't name any names. And I think that's actually sort of gotten mainstream now. I think that's, it's a much bigger universe now and a lot bigger range of opinions. But I think that certainly for the time, that was a pretty reasonable compromise.
Thank you. And I think that, so the last question was, where can we buy the book and where can we find it? We also pasted the link in the Discord server. And by the way, if you don't know what we're talking about, there's a link in the bottom of the screen to join the Discord server, and all the speakers are actually hanging in there. And please feel free to join the conversation. What we're going to be doing is actually we're going to go in a quick break, and then the next speaker will be with us within the next minute or so. Thank you again so much, Joe, for supporting the community, for supporting us, and specifically this event. Thank you again.
Thanks very much. Really appreciate it. Have fun.